Hello, on Europe and You this time.
In the studio, in light of the PIP scandal, should the EU do more to protect implant patients?
Lacking competition, the EU says, are Northern Ireland consumers paying over the odds for their gas bills?
And the two British MEPs who ran for President of the European Parliament. We've got a full report on the highs and the lows from the campaign.
A phone call charge for disabled rail passengers amounts to discrimination. That's according to a senior Labour MEP. Research carried out by the TSSA union found that 12 of the UK's rail operators offer an 0845 rather than a free phone number for people with disabilities to plan their journeys and arrange assistance.
The Association of Train Operating Companies says it's been working with the disability groups to design an assistance service fitting for their needs. But Labour Euro MP Brian Simpson, who chairs the European Parliament's Transport Committee, believes any charge goes against EU law on equal access for everybody.
We have clear regulations that say that passengers with reduced mobility should not be discriminated against. Now, in my view, this is a discrimination. And to say, well, you know, we're running an 0845 number or whatever and it's costing people, I think is wrong. What we need is to be absolutely clear that passengers with reduced mobility should have the same access to the public transport network as people with full abilities.
We vote for them, but in January it was MEPs' turn to vote amongst themselves for a new European Parliament president. And this time two Brits stood for election, Liberal Democrats Diana Wallis and Conservative Neerj Deva. Both wanted to challenge what's often described as a stitch-up, where the big political groups do a deal to decide who gets the job. In the end, their man, German Socialist MEP Martin Schulz, won as expected. But between them, Neerj Deva and Diana Wallis managed to get the support of some 283 members. That's around 40% of the vote.
Well, if I hadn't stood and declared, I was the first to declare that I'm going to stand, there would have been a coronation, there wouldn't have been an election, and that would have been terrible for the Parliament. That Parliament that represents 500 million people has the President just anointed by two people in a back room doing a deal.
After failing to win the presidency, Diana Wallis decided to step down as an MEP. But speaking after the vote, she told us she still hopes her campaign will have a lasting impact on the European Parliament.
People are pretty, how can I say, disconnected from politicians, and they do think that we say one thing and do another. And I hope by doing what I've done that people will realise that some of us do try to stand up for what we believe in, and it's not always easy, but you know, maybe some of the ideas and some of the themes get through in the end.
With Diana Wallis's resignation, her husband, Stuart Arnold, was next in line to take the seat. But after accusations of nepotism, including from a fellow Lib Dem MEP, he declined the position. Third on the party's election list, Rebecca Taylor, who's been working in public health, will instead take up the post.
Still to come. Heating your home. The EU says Northern Ireland consumers need more energy competition.
And the ban on battery hens, now in force, but is everyone up to standard?
The recent scandal over breast implants has raised some serious questions about a multi-billion-pound industry.
It's estimated 40,000 women in the UK have implants made by a French company called PIP.
Towards the end of last year, it was revealed that PIP had used industrial rather than medical silicone and that implants may be more prone to rupture and leakage. Many have questioned how PIP managed to get away with it and how the scandal has since been handled.
With the EU due to review European law on implants, does the industry need to be more tightly regulated? Here to discuss the issue, Labour MEP Linda McAvan.
And the former doctor, Bulgarian MEP Antonia Parvanova.
Linda McAvan, let me turn to you first. There are already European laws covering implants. So what checks can be carried out on manufacturers as it stands?
Well, the problem that's happened in this particular case is quite complicated because what we saw was a fraud in France. We had a company that made implants and they were inspected. There's a system of inspection of companies who make implants, but they were given 3 weeks' notice of the inspection. And so the company director told the people to hide the industrial silicone away from the inspectors. So when the inspectors came, they saw proper medical silicone, it was hidden. And so that's clearly one loophole that has to be closed. We need to have inspections which are not announced, which are a surprise for the companies to stop that kind of loophole.
Antonia Parvanova, we know, and you must know from your past work as a doctor, that for medicines, for example, there's a very strict authorization procedure. Is there anything like that in place for breast implants?
Actually, breast implants are considered as medical device, and there is a revision coming up on the Clinical Devices Directive, and absolutely it's necessary to look further on all measures that are proposed for the vigilance of devices. And it's an issue also how to prevent these cases to happen in the future, because to me it's a criminal case. But of course, very strict authorization procedure and liability might be needed because there are other border issues which are used for cosmetic purposes, or for example like Botox or some fillers, which are also not subject to vigilance procedures and authorization. They are used in some member states either by everybody or by medical doctors which have not specialized to use those. And also they are registered for other purposes like the Botox, but not as being used in cosmetic surgery or for cosmetic purposes, which is completely different. It's breaching the law, and that's why we try to do our best to strengthen the legislation.
So, Linda, you put this issue on the agenda in the European Parliament. What really do you want to see happen? This is not just on this particular issue, but there's a wider case anyway of European law needing to be revised.
Yes, I mean, as Antonia's just said, if we look at medicines, there's a very, very strict procedure. But we treat all medical devices the same at the moment. We think there are different kinds of medical devices. I mean, there's ones like needles that are used by doctors and health professionals, but then there's ones you put inside your body. We would like those ones subject to a proper authorization, that the national regulatory authorities are the ones who check the devices, that they go through a procedure, that we have a proper procedure for monitoring the devices when they're in people's bodies, that we have a register of who has the implants, what kind of implants. So if there's a problem like the one with the PIP implants, we can trace who has which implant. The big scandal, and the real scandal, is that at the moment we don't know who has the implants, and the clinics can't tell us. They never kept a register. So that's not the case with medicines. If you take a medicine, every product, every package is labelled. We can track the batch immediately. With the PIP implants, nobody knows. And so we have lots of people worried for nothing, as well as the people who have legitimate cause for concern.
Antonia Parvanova, how would you see that working, the kind of registration system that Linda's talking about? We've heard mention of barcodes, for example, as an idea. How would this work, do you think?
There is an entire system. The same could be used for, as it is for medicinal products, could be used also for medical devices. And this is a process of deciding from the starting point, from the production of particular product, to the implementation in this particular case, for example. Full traceability procedure could be developed, and that could be applied. And then we would have been able to know which women, and also to follow for a longer period what would be the health impact, because this is not the same system and not the same procedure when we do clinical trials for medicines. We don't provide the same procedure for clinical trials of medical devices, and we don't know what's going to happen even with the medical gel implants after 10, after 20 years, and for some women, given the fact that they put the implant at the age of 20, 25, it's a long journey, and we don't know what will be the long-term effects. And this is quite irresponsible. It's not a personal problem. I read in the media that it has been tackled as a personal problem of taking the decision whether one should have an implant and not. But it's a public health issue and it's a public safety. And we as legislators have to guarantee all the necessary procedures and all the requirements that people could rely that everything that is on the market and intervenes with their health is absolutely safe.
And you said it's a public health issue. Do you think the way different public health authorities in different countries have handled this, do you think there needs to be a more common approach in future?
Absolutely yes, because all those people that are worried, all those that already had complications and all those that might have complications, first of all they have to be treated in an equal way. And it should not be different from one member state to another one.
In this particular case, the UK, I think, took it on a case-by-case basis. In France, they kind of told women as a whole, you know, their advice to get rid of these.
And because the whole issue is related to fraud and some criminal activities, those people that had the implants, they have not been involved, they have been not aware of what's going on. That's why they should not be responsible and they should not co-share the costs for that might be needed to replace these implants. They have been victims and they are victims, so they should be entitled to compensation and fair compensation.
And we heard there about the cost of putting this right. Do you think there needs to be some kind of backup insurance scheme that actually would be there for women in the future if this happened and they needed to have breast implants replaced or taken out?
Yes, I mean, there are different systems for health in different countries and different ways of funding health schemes. Some are insurance-based, some are like the United Kingdom, a kind of public, totally funded scheme. And the biggest problem seems to be in private clinics. In the public health system in the UK, the government has said, NHS, we will deal with it. But the private clinics are the ones where there are problems. Some of them have gone out of business. And what do you do if the people who put your implant in don't exist anymore? I think that the private clinics ought to have a kind of insurance system. I've thought about the way that our travel agencies have a system. They have APTA, which they have to pay into, and if one goes out of business and there's a problem, then the customer doesn't lose their money and their holiday. If it's good enough for holidays, I think it's much more important to do this for medical devices. So I think the private health industry, which after all spends millions advertising implants to people, should spend some of its money creating an insurance scheme.
OK, well, the EU, as we said, are looking at reviewing this directive during the course of this year. How hopeful are you that you can get some of these things, all of those things that we've been talking about, into the new law?
We have been actually talking about these special safeguards. And I think that, don't want to be cynical, but what happened with PIP implants, then it's a very good argument and it will strengthen our position, because I can say that in a couple of cases we have been minority when we try to put very strict conditions, and it has been seen as a burden or a barrier for new technologies and for further development of medical practices. Then I think we can use this case and many other, by the way, to support our proposal and to support our very restrictive way of playing with public health, and human health should be the priority for everybody.
And Linda, I mean, this isn't the first time that the European Parliament has actually discussed this issue and called for action. Is it going to be different this time, do you think? Do you think that you're going to get some of these measures that we've talked about into European law?
I think we will. I mean, we asked, I think 10 years ago, for a register of all implants. The governments of Europe said, no, it's bureaucracy, we don't need it. I think we do need it. This case has shown we absolutely do need it.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you ever so much, both of you, for joining us.
Yes, thanks very much.
The EU is taking the British and Irish governments to court to give gas consumers in Northern Ireland better competition. It's estimated that 44% of people in Northern Ireland are living in fuel poverty, meaning that they struggle to afford to heat their homes.
The European Commission believes that problems with the gas market, particularly the pipeline with the Republic of Ireland, is stifling competition. The case is being taken to the European Court of Justice. That's been welcomed by MEP Jim Nicholson. He says consumers in Northern Ireland pay far too much for their energy bills.
We have suffered because we have not been connected to the grid, and the challenge is of course to make energy prices much less, and the only way you can do that is by having greater competition. And of course with the rising price in oil and the electricity hike, then the gas simply has followed that, and rather than giving good competition within Northern Ireland.
Higher animal welfare standards will be widely flouted if the EU doesn't get tough, the Scottish MEP has warned. Egg farmers have had more than a decade to get rid of old battery cages, which were outlawed from the beginning of this year. But MEPs from across the political divide have been warning for months that farmers in many EU countries would fail to meet the deadline. Now the European Commission has proof battery farming is still going on in 13 of them. So it's threatening court action if they don't stop selling battery eggs.
Meanwhile, in pig farming, a Europe-wide ban on sow stalls is supposed to come into force next January. The stalls are often too small for the pregnant sows to be able to move around properly. They've been illegal in the UK for some 13 years. But the former farmer turned Lib Dem MEP George Lyon says elsewhere in Europe, farmers are watching to see whether the EU really follows through on battery hens before deciding to improve standards for their pigs.
The great worry is that if we actually fail to punish those who are non-compliant on the eggs regime, then those producers who are currently not compliant with the pigs welfare law will just say, well, not worth my while doing it, we'll just ignore it. So at stake here is the whole credibility of the EU welfare laws, where we're trying to improve animal welfare across the 27 countries in response to consumer demands.
Thanks for watching Europe and You. Take a look at our website for more stories.
You can also follow us on Twitter. See you again soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.